Next on our panel is Helen Kleberg Groves, who I hope, first of all, is going to talk a little bit about her upcoming book, a book that she wrote about her parents, Bob and Helen Kleberg of the King Ranch. That book is going to be coming out in November.
We hope.
We hope. I was really fortunate to be able to interview Mrs. Groves last year when she was a Foy Proctor Memorial Cowmen's Award of Honor recipient. She's daughter of Bob and Helen Kleberg, great-granddaughter of Captain Richard and Henrietta Kleberg. Ms. Groves was born into a rich family ranching tradition. Along with her induction into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, she's known as the First Lady of Cutting and was inducted into the National Cutting Horse Association's Hall of Fame. And she's also well known for her Silverbrook ranches, a successful Santa Gertrudis and quarter horse operation. A National Cowgirl Hall of Fame inductee, one of the women pioneers who, and I quote this from the Hall of Fame, helped settle the frontier and who continue to live their lives with the grit and determination of the American cowgirl. And whether you know Helen or not, you'll be able to recognize that grit and determination as you listen to her speak. Helen Groves.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'll stay here because I didn't like looking at your back when I wanted to make you sure you knew that I knew about Kingfisher. Yeah, okay. The book that I've just finished with for the moment started out to not be a book at all. I got a great deal of help from Bill Benson, and I don't know how many of you know him. He is a man that really put together the little museum that Texas and Southwestern cattle raisers has in their office. And I urge you to go see it if you never have. They usually have a nice little exhibit or something going on there. I met Bill because I thought it was a shame that you just drive past the Texas and Southwestern and you think, was it back there? I think I should have seen it. They didn't have a sign. So after a year or two, between Bill and myself, we finally got Texas and Southwestern to have a sign made by the man that I said could make them one. He lives in Hyco, and his little museum has graduated into being Holt Hickman and his wife's project, the Texas Cowboy Hall of Fame in Northside and Fort Worth, in the Mule Barn. Do go there too, there's a lot to see. Anyway, Bill Benson quit when Texas and Southwestern decided that they wanted to make a new museum. And he felt that he did not want to spend his time money raising, and that it was going to take a long time, and that was not what he was interested in, but in history, and history of the ranching families. Through his efforts, and of course the board there and the different presidents, we have photographs of the different presidents or paintings of them if it was that far back, and of other famous people in the cow thing. And I felt so fortunate to get him to go down to my mother and father's clapboard L-shaped house at King Ranch. And that house is older than the big house that you see pictures of. Now, people think that's odd. It was my mother and father's house. They got married later after the big house was there. How come? Well, how come was that the big house had graduated from first being a dugout, which Captain King provided for his bride, to a one-story nice house, probably made with a good bit of cypress and pine, probably brought in down the Mississippi and over through New Orleans and down the coast to Corpus, and then halfway put together and carried out there on wagons, you know. Okay, they kept adding to it until it got to be a very big house. And a lot of people wonder, well, what are these big houses doing out in the middle of nowhere? Well, that's just exactly why. Because there were no towns, there were no bed and breakfast or hotels or anything. And believe you me, whoever came through the country, you sure did feed them and their horse, and that way they didn't have to kill you, you know. My father, I didn't put this in the book, I don't think, but I can remember him saying it so many times, why make an enemy of somebody who can be your friend? And I don't think he just dreamed that up. I think he was raised with that kind of an idea. Well, anyway, I'm getting windy about the book. Bill went down and helped us get all of the old pictures that my mother and father had. I believe you would say they were kind of collectors. There's old magazines and old photographs and scrapbooks and books and all sorts of information. And I swore as a child that my house would never look like that, with books and magazines stacked everywhere. But it does, and I pass that trait on, I'm afraid, to some of my children. But anyway, all that stuff, Bill got it all cataloged and collected and put away and moved around here and there. And I said, you know, we've spent so much time and money on this project, there ought to be a book. You know, my kids are not going to go through all this stuff. So he tried to write a book, but I'm sorry, he's not a writer, and I'm probably not either. He wrote a very informative tome about that thick, and nobody's going to read it. I've read other people's books and told them you're going to have to do something about it. So I know that much about books. So then Rue Judd showed up in Albany, and her husband got the job of looking after a little family property that Watt Matthews had put together. And fortunately, he had some experience of coping in that he did a good bit of lobbying in Washington, D.C., and then he's on the board of cattle raisers and a good hand there. And Rue's really not a country girl. She is not. She likes all the books and the stories and the pictures and the food and all of that part of it, but the bugs and the snakes and that part of country life doesn't suit her. But the good thing is she has a lot of energy, and she has a publishing company, Bright Sky Press, in Albany. So Bill and Rue and I visited, and we ended up deciding that maybe what we ought to do was to make more of a picture book with some writing in it, and that we'd have this information and pictures, and it's really not all cataloged yet, really properly. And it took years You know, when I started out, I thought it was a sort of a 6-month project. Well, it's not. And I'm frankly quite sick of it by now. But one thing that happens while you're going through all this stuff and information and all that is it leads you to want to know more. And now people think I know a lot of history. And it's really probably because trying to put something together, I've had to go out and look so many more places. Now there is a story which I told Tom Lee, and he put it in the King Ranch history. And I didn't make that story up. My grandmother, Alice Gertrudis King Kleberg, used to tell us stories to keep us quiet. It worked pretty well, not too well, but anyway, one of the stories was that one night a stranger arrived at Santa Gertrudis King Ranch, and Captain King met him, and he liked him well enough that he invited him for supper with the family and who else happened to be around there. Ranches are really not lonely places. They're full of people all the time. I can't tell you who's coming tomorrow or a lot of times who was there yesterday, but they're there. And anyway, King liked this man. And in the morning, he said, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" And the man said, "Well," he said, "you could, if you wouldn't mind, send somebody with me to get me on the right road out of here and on to where I need to go." So Captain King said, "That's fine, I'll send old Jose with you." And so old Jose saddles up his old gelding, the kind that usually are hanging around the ranch that you can put little kids on or something. And they go on down the road, and he says, "All right, senor, this is where you take this fork and not that one." And so the man thanked him, and he got off his horse, which was a beautiful flea-bitten gray stallion. And he said, "I want to take your horse, and you take my horse to Captain King and say, 'Compliments of Jesse James.'" And then there were flea-bitten gray horses on the ranch for many, many, many years. I remember some of them. Okay, that was one of the stories, and I can tell you more, but I can't tell you all of them in 15 minutes, you know. But your thing about Kingfisher, I didn't see a lot of hands go up after the Moore brothers got through shooting the last of the buffalo on the ranch that Buster Welch had for a while, that Double Mountain Ranch. There wasn't any work for those guys, you know. A lot of them were displaced after the Civil War, came out of the South or other places. They went and shot buffalo for a long time, but it wasn't that long. And then it was over. And some of them went to trail driving, and some of them went to be lawmen, and a lot of them went to be outlaws. And there were supposed to be approximately 500 outlaws down there near Goliad with Kingfisher. Now you correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard this and read it several times, more than several. And they used to break up into smaller bands a lot of times, most of the time. There might be 3 guys go to raid some little place, or if they wanted to raid some bigger place, there might be as many as 40 of them go to the same direction. So one of the things that Captain King had was to just mainly get his place stocked, get people there, and keep control of his property. You know what? This isn't in the book, but this keeping control of your property, we better keep control of our country too. I'm not going to name any names, but I think you know who's more interested in doing that than somebody else. Okay. All right, I'm going to answer a question that came up much earlier from Mr. Haley back there about some pens that he acquired from Brazil. And these pens were very near a property that King Ranch had. We had a big operation in Brazil, which my father put together, and it was with Swift and Company. The cattle and horses were operated together. The operation was one. The land was already, this land belonged to Swift and this belonged to King Ranch. But anyway, the land near Presidente Prudente, where Mr. Haley went, I am pretty sure that the design for the pens there went there from King Ranch. They're the Calera pens, and they've been pretty modified now. I don't know exactly what they've done the last few years, but people forget what they had, you know. But those pens that went to Brazil from King Ranch, my mother and father went on a rather belated honeymoon. I was born in 1927. I believe they were married in I don't know when it was, but they had jackets on. It was 1925. And my mother was sick after I was born for quite a while, and Daddy decided to take her on a nice long sea voyage, and they went to Argentina on their honeymoon in 1929. And my mother came back from down there with a beautiful centerpiece. It had a lid with sort of fruit, silver, hand-hammered silver, gorgeous. And there's a tray for it and finger bowls. And Daddy came home with this set of pens being shipped to him and a design for how the other pens went that they wouldn't ship, that they could just make at home. So things, what is it? What goes around comes around. And they're wonderful pens because you don't bruise your cattle. You can operate the gates from above. And Daddy modified them a little bit with putting these, what they call bump gates, instead of slide through. But anyway, they're very safe, good, stout pens. Well, I have to tell you a little bit about my mother and the finger bowls, and I don't know whether this story's in the book. It probably isn't, but it might be. Oh. My cousin B. Johnson, he and his half-brother were raised like brothers to me after they lost their parents. And I don't really know whether it was before or after B had lost his parents, but he was at our house, which he often was. My mother was there, myself, Daddy, and a cattle buyer. And the cattle buyer and Daddy were, you know, in very busy cattle conversation, which you always are if you have somebody else that knows about cattle or politics or ranching or whatever. So we had a nice lunch, and then they served it. It's a nice lady serving the table, and so then they came around with the dessert plates, and there were these little bowls on there, these beautiful little silver hand-hammered bowls. And they had a little water in there and a little orange tree flower or leaf or something. So this man, he kind of looked at it and wasn't quite sure whether he was supposed to drink it or what. But he waited till he saw what other people did, which is what I was always brought up to do. And then he got this little bowl and he put it over like that and went on talking to Daddy, and they brought floating island, and everybody got some floating island, and Bea and I were sitting there just bursting. So he takes a big bite, and there's a doily, hand crocheted doily there. And he swallowed it. And Bea and I just like to burst in too. Well, I could tell you all a lot of stories, but you know, you can ask me and I just keep spouting on, and I will let you do that for the remainder of the time, which I probably used most of it. I'm out. I'm sorry. Well, later you can ask me.
There you go. There you go. Thank you so much.